All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're tackling something a little different, a little unexpected. We're going to be talking about sports,
Hmm.
but with a bit of a twist. We're not going to be breaking down uh, game stats or debating the latest trades or scores or anything like that.
Right.
We're actually going to explore how the world of sports can actually help you learn and speak English better.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing today.
And for this deep dive, we're going to be taking a close look at an episode of the Fluent English podcast, which really digs into this unique approach to language learning.
Yeah, this episode really caught my attention too, and it's definitely a fresh perspective.
It really did. I mean, who knew that something as simple as like watching a soccer match or, just listening to sports commentary could actually help you, build your vocabulary and even like enhance your understanding of different cultures.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound kind of unconventional at first, but when you think about it, sports are practically a universal language. Terms like football, basketball, volleyball. I mean, these are understood all over the world, regardless of what language you speak.
So what you're saying is even if I'm not like, completely fluent in English, I can still connect with someone, on the other side of the world who loves the same sport as me.
Exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of it, and by engaging with sports in English, whether it's watching a game or listening to a podcast or even reading an article, you're kind of immersing yourself in the language in a really fun and natural way. And you start picking up new vocabulary, idioms, even improving your pronunciation just by listening.
That's so interesting. It actually reminds me of when I was, first learning Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
I used to watch like Spanish language soccer matches all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I didn't understand everything, perfectly, I started to pick up on common phrases and kind of get a feel for the general flow of the commentary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about exposing yourself to the language in a context that you actually enjoy, right?
All right.
And, speaking of vocabulary, the podcast actually highlights some essential sports vocabulary words that are really helpful for any English learner.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, they mention words like athlete, team, coach, match, goal, victory.
Okay, so it's kind of like a starter pack for navigating sports conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It gives you that solid foundation.
Yeah.
And I think, as you get more comfortable, you can start branching out and exploring the specific vocabulary related to your favorite sports.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you're really into, tennis, you could focus on learning terms like serve, volley, deuce, all those specific tennis words.
Precisely.
Right, because I remember when I first tried to, follow a cricket match.
Oh, yeah.
I was totally lost. It felt like they were speaking a whole different language.
It's a very unique sport.
Yeah. But once I, learned a few key terms like wicket, boundary, overs, then I was able to at least kind of grasp the basic flow of the game.
Right. And that's a perfect example of how knowing those specific vocabulary words can really unlock a whole new level of understanding and enjoyment.
Right.
And it's not just about the words themselves. The podcast also delved into how understanding the cultural context surrounding different sports is really crucial for truly grasping, the nuances of how people talk about them.
Oh, okay. Like they gave that example about soccer.
Exactly.
It's loved all over the world.
Yeah.
But the way it's played, the way it's celebrated, it can be so different between countries.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take Brazil, for example. I mean, soccer, it's more than just a sport. It's woven into their cultural identity. It's a source of national pride, a way of life.
Yeah.
And that passion is reflected in the language they use to talk about the game.
Yeah, I've heard that Brazilian fans are incredibly expressive and passionate, especially during like the World Cup.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a sight to behold for sure.
Yeah.
And now compare that to, let's say, the US, where American football has become kind of this national phenomenon.
Right.
The Super Bowl in particular has really transcended just being a sporting event. And it's evolved into this massive cultural event that captures global attention.
It's true. Even people who don't, necessarily follow American football, they often get caught up in the excitement of the Super Bowl, the halftime show, the commercials, the whole thing.
And the way commentators describe American football with its strategic plays and its, hard-hitting action, it really reflects the intensity and the spectacle of the sport.
So even though, football and soccer, they're both popular globally, the cultural context surrounding them really shape how fans experience and talk about those sports in unique ways.
Precisely.
That's fascinating. I'm starting to see how learning about sports in English isn't just about acquiring new words. It's like gaining a deeper understanding of different cultures and perspectives.
And that actually brings us to another point that the podcast highlighted, which is the use of sports idioms in everyday English conversation.
Oh, right.
We all know phrases like get the ball rolling, throw in the towel, hit a home run.
Yeah, but wait, are you telling me those aren't just, for the sports field?
Think of them as metaphors that have kind of leaped from the stadium into everyday life. They add this color and personality to your language. Imagine telling a friend about a successful project at work, saying, we really hit a home run on that one. It has a lot more impact than simply saying, it went well, right?
Yeah, I totally get it. It's like injecting a bit of energy and imagery into your language.
Exactly.
And, I'm always looking for ways to make my English sound more natural and engaging. So what other sports idioms did they mention?
Well, they talked about drop the ball, which implies making a mistake, missing an opportunity.
Okay.
And level playing field, which signifies fairness and equal opportunity. It's often used in discussions about social issues or even just friendly debates.
These are great examples. I can already see how understanding and using these idioms correctly can really elevate my English fluency and make me sound more like a native speaker.
Yeah, exactly. It's about moving beyond textbook English and embracing that richness and depth of idiomatic expressions that, native speakers use naturally.
Okay, so we've got this treasure trove of vocabulary, we've got cultural insights, we've got these fun idioms. But the question is, how do we put all of this into practice? How can our listener actually level up their English through sports?
Well, that's where we'll pick things up next. The Fluent English podcast had some really practical advice for just that. So before the break, we were talking about how useful idioms can be, and the podcast actually gave a really interesting example of how you can use the phrase drop the ball outside of, a literal sports context.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious about that one.
Okay, so let's say you forgot to send an important email at work, something pretty common.
Happens to the best of us.
You could tell a colleague, oh man, I really dropped the ball on that one.
Okay.
It's concise, it gets your point across, and it shows that you have a command of these, idiomatic expressions.
Yeah, that's so much more natural than just saying I made a mistake or something like that.
Exactly. And remember those cultural nuances we talked about.
Yeah.
The podcast made a good point that understanding those differences can actually help prevent you from dropping the ball in social situations.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Knowing when to use certain expressions or, maybe what not to use certain expressions.
Exactly.
Like that bloody example from English football.
Yeah.
Can really make you a more culturally fluent speaker.
Yeah, it's like having a secret decoder ring to unlock all these different styles of English around the world. And the more you expose yourself to these variations, the more adaptable you become as a speaker.
Right.
But let's get back to those practical tips for actually putting all of this into practice.
Okay, yeah, Coach, give us the game plan. how do we level up our English through sports?
Well, the first tip from the podcast is pretty simple, but it's really powerful. Watch sports in English.
Okay.
It might seem obvious, but just passively listening to commentators, even with subtitles, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah.
It's like immersing yourself in the rhythm and flow of the language, you know?
Exactly.
Do you have any, like, specific tips for how to get the most out of that, though?
Oh, well, I would say pay attention to how the commentators use vocabulary to describe the action.
Okay.
Notice how they build suspense, how their tone changes depending on what's happening in the game.
So it's not just about understanding the words themselves.
Right.
It's about absorbing how they're used, in this dynamic, real-time situation.
Precisely. You're tuning your ear to those nuances of spoken English, the natural pauses, the emphasis, the emotion, all of that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the podcast also emphasized that finding friends or communities to practice with can really accelerate your learning.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Talking about sports with others is such a great way to, test out new vocabulary, try those idioms in a relaxed setting.
Exactly. And, you don't even have to be in the same room anymore. There's so many options.
That's true.
Did they have any suggestions for, finding those communities online? They mentioned online forums, social media groups, even language exchange platforms. These can be great spaces to connect with other sports enthusiasts from all over the world who are also learning English.
It's like forming your own, international sports club virtually.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Did they have any other tips that really stood out to you?
They suggested focusing on learning the vocabulary and expressions related to just one sport, at least to start.
Okay.
Choosing your favorite sport lets you really delve deep into the nuances of its language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Instead of spreading yourself too thin, you can become like a specialist in, a particular area, and that can really boost your confidence when speaking about it in English.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what? I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not just about memorizing words. It's about really connecting with the culture, the history, the emotional weight of these sports.
You got it. And that's what makes this approach so engaging and effective.
Yeah.
You're not just learning a language, you're experiencing it.
It's been really interesting exploring how sports can be such a cool tool for learning English.
Yeah.
From the basic vocabulary to the cultural side of things and those idioms we talked about.
Yeah, it's definitely a more engaging way to approach language learning.
But for our listener, the one who's ready to jump in and start using all of this. What would you say is the best place to start?
The podcast had a really good analogy. They said to think of it like training for a marathon.
Okay.
You wouldn't just, wake up one day and try to run 26 miles, would you?
No way.
You'd start with shorter distances, gradually building up your stamina and, getting your body used to it.
Right. You got to work your way up.
It's the same with learning a language. Start with small, achievable goals. Maybe it's watching one soccer match a week in English. Or joining an online forum where you can talk about your favorite sport.
Yeah, I like that. It breaks it down into manageable steps.
Exactly.
Instead of being overwhelmed by the whole marathon.
And just like in sports, there will be times when you feel stuck or maybe a little discouraged.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But the key is to just keep practicing, keep pushing yourself, and most importantly, have fun with it.
It should be enjoyable, right?
Exactly.
We also talked about using those sports idioms. Actually trying to work them into conversations.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It can feel a little awkward at first, I imagine.
It can be, but it gets easier the more you do it.
Yeah, it's like practicing a new move on the basketball court. The first few times you try it, you might feel a little clumsy.
Right.
But eventually it just becomes like second nature.
Exactly. And, another tip from the podcast was don't be afraid to ask questions.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
If you hear a commentator use a phrase or a word you don't understand, write it down, look it up later.
That's a good one. I do that all the time when I'm watching movies or TV shows in English.
Yeah, it's a great way to build your vocabulary organically.
So it's not just about, sitting down with a textbook and flashcards.
Right, exactly.
And actually, speaking of organic learning, one of the coolest tips from the podcast was to find ways to incorporate sports into your daily life in English.
Ah.
So beyond just watching games, you mean?
Yeah, maybe you could join a local sports team or find a group that meets up to play basketball or tennis or whatever you're into.
Right.
Or even volunteer at a sporting event. There are tons of ways to get involved.
I love that. It's about finding those immersive experiences that make language learning feel like a natural part of your life, not just, something you have to study.
Exactly.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring how sports can be this amazing tool for learning English.
It's a whole new perspective, isn't it?
It really is. And I hope our listener is leaving with a sense of excitement, to kind of see the world of sports as this gateway to a richer and more fluent understanding of English.
Me too.
It's been an eye-opening deep dive for sure, and I hope it's been the same for our listener.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, learning a language, it's a journey, not a sprint. So pace yourself, enjoy the process, and don't forget to have fun.
Have fun.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.